Hello, my name is Darren Bill and I'm about to deliver a presentation on what I believe is the role of the sports scientist. As part of the research that I've done looking at the role of a sports scientist, I'd like to include some of the areas of research that was used. These entail considering the view of a sports scientist themselves, and this was achieved by speaking to and asking several questions to a sports scientist at a championship football club, reviewing suitable literature, having a look at research papers and certain books that have covered the role of the sports scientist, reviewing the considerations and the views of a player. One player in particular is what I've included due to time constraints of the presentation, and lastly is having a look at the view and the considerations of a couple of football clubs. So, to start with, we can look at the Olympic Games. And a statement by Hunt 2012 says that ever since the very first occurrence of sport, humans have been trying to gain an edge on the competition, this being the Olympic Games. And thus sports science was born. It was the desire to enhance athletic performance that sparked a revolution in the way athletes would prepare for competition. So, my understanding so far, having done the modules and looked at the different roles of the sports scientist, that include nutrition, biomechanics and physiology, is having a look at the overall view of a sports scientist role and what they might include during a time at a football club in particular. So the different areas that make up this sports scientist role are the physiology. Another area is the psychology, and with regards to psychology, it's a module that we've been working on at the moment. And again, it's looking at the individual as well as collectively as a team, and we can attribute any of those areas really to the individuals and collective. We look at the diet and nutrition, and again this has been one of the modules that we've included on the course. We look at clothing and ergonomics, how we can advance this, how we can look at the cycling as an example, the style of a football boot. We can look at technology, the equipment that we use to test results and analyse, receive data to see whether there are improvements in the individuals. And this also applies with the technical analysis that we can look and provide into game time, and that will come more prevalent later on in the lecture when we look at one particular club. So they're the areas of my understanding that make up the role of a sports scientist. Now let's have a look at the view of certain different people that are involved in that role. Having spoke to 3 people that are working at a championship club at the moment in the sports scientist role and asking them different questions about their role, collectively I've gained some of the answers they put and is included in this slide. So, what do they think their role entails? Well, it's to analyse individuals and aid them in becoming fitter and stronger players. They also look at the role of injury prevention as well, and hopefully look at that with regards to rehab. So prevent any injuries from happening by overtraining, and obviously when there are injuries happen through particular games or any other areas, then it's how best to get that person back to where they need to be, and that's an academy level all the way up to first team level. And what they also said was that the most value that they see themselves to the club is the collection of data analysis to identify people's strengths and weakness. And we can see by this diagram here that we've got an holistic view. Well, they have an holistic view with this approach. Certainly working in the academy, when somebody comes into the academy at certain ages, they will look at the historical data, they will look at their medical screening, movement screening, and then they will look at the present, what are they actually doing at the moment within that academy and their academy role. They'll look at their life load, they'll look at their hydration and their weight, they'll look at the planning load of training, and they'll look at that, compare that with the game load as well. But they won't leave that there, they will then look to the future. So, how can they advance that individual so that collectively it works for the team? They look at the psychology, the conditioning, they look at time in the gym, what they need to be doing in the gym, and obviously any rehab that needs to be done as well. So that's one particular view from a sports scientist. The other view I looked at was research papers, and in particular this research, the findings resulted in the impact of sports science on elite football. And they found it contradictory, facilitating on one hand the development of the football and the experience, while on the other hand threatening to transform the football spectacle into a mundane exercise in the search of increased functional peak performance. And as stated up there, they look at it as a commodity. So are we trying to get the best player so that then that individual then can be sold on? And it's an argument that has been put forward in this paper. Another area looking at against maybe the sports scientists is a quote from Riley 2003 that states that soccer is an art rather than a science, and it's exemplified by the craft of great players such as Cruyff and Zidane. And the game things happen in the game by chance. And when we look at that, it's partly determined by chance or strokes of individual geniuses rather than what we can prepare and what we can plan. So again, another different example from what I've looked at. I've just taken one player's quote just to have a look at the negative side that somebody might have about sports sciences. And this comes from Rio Ferdinand. Now Rio Ferdinand in this states that he's got a main concern about the present and coming generations of footballers as being robbed of their robustness. And what he alludes to in this is that the sports scientist guy will come in at certain times and he will say that he doesn't think that individual should train. You know, there's a game Saturday, if you teeter over the edge then you won't be fit for that particular game. So all of a sudden, as quoted there, you start drilling someone on training and a sports science bloke in his words pops over and says, whoa, you're into the red zone. So again, is that something that he feels that wasn't really happening years ago? And the robustness on the way he learnt football was there and wasn't affected by any sports scientist. He was game ready in his opinion. Let's have a look at the flip side of that. This is a case study, or a small case study based on Leicester City and the science that they had behind their title. And when we look at this, the science behind that, they actually quote and reward the sports science team as being innovative and the medical team carefully that integrate into the decision making of the manager. So Claudio Ranieri, in this case as he was happy to be part of that team and part of the decision making. And in their view, it creates a perfect model for success. Some of the data that we can look at in how they used sports scientists and how that had a positive effect was that they had the fewest injuries in that particular season. They used the fewest amount of players, so that was a positive for them. And when you look at the actual game plan that Ranieri had, they had the fastest players, and that again had a positive effect on counter-attacking, goals scored, shots on target. So his game plan very much was to soak up pressure at times, but then hit teams on the break, and we can see how this related to having fast players, using less players, consistency within the team, and few injuries over the course of the season. When we look at the sports science team, behind that we can see that there's 8 people that are in there. We've got sports science performance analysis, we've got head of fitness, we've got strength and power coaches, we've got performance psychologists, we've got performance nutritionists and head physiotherapists. So a real big team that had an influence around that first team and their success. But obviously you need the money to do that. And if we compare what that size team was maybe to a team lower down in the leagues, and this particular advert come out recently was for a sports science person advertising in a voluntary position. So you can see at the Premiership, the top level, we've got vast amount of money being invested to make every bit of that performance the best it can be, that collectively hopefully will relate into a winning team. Whereas here we're relying on volunteers. Obviously great for the individuals that can come along in part of their training, but for me that says there's not a lot of money that can be invested in that particular area. And obviously as you drop down the leagues in semi-professional, then it's very rare for clubs at that non-league level to have a sports scientist of one person, let alone the vast amount that we've seen with Leicester. So, to put that all together then, and having a look at that, my conclusion is that the role of the sports scientist is a positive one for me. It's someone or a team that will look at the inputs into those individuals that collectively make up the team to develop the performance output. So whatever they're putting in, whatever they're doing, you know, their training, their gym sessions, their dietary, the actual biomechanics of the performance relies on a successful or becomes a successful output. For me, it's part of the marginal gains, and if we can get 1%, if those sports scientists can get 1% throughout, then it creates a marginal gain, and that's where they have the advantage over the next team, certainly collectively. And some of the research that I looked at said about all of this is common sense. You know, all we're doing really is telling people what they should know. But even if that is the case, what I feel they're doing, the sports scientist role, is creating an analytical performance mindset, so that when that individual does do something before games, he does do something before training, he is aware of what things he needs to do best to create the best performance during those training events and performance events. So for me, that's what the role of the sports scientist entails. And hopefully, sports and science put together gives us an increased performance output, as previously stated. Lastly, the last two slides are some of the research that I've done and looked at and obviously referenced. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.